Michael, thank you so much for agreeing to join this call and also endorse me for this general election. I've made no secret that I've always thought that you have been the best politician in the Dáil over the last 4 years, and especially during lockdown times. I think that's when I really started to come across you, and in many ways you were actually a form of inspiration to me in terms of the leadership you showed, the confidence and the principled manner in which you've gone about your work over the last year and the last 4 years. And just in the last year, I think you really reached national headlines with your questioning of certain ministers, the Minister for Justice, on the asylum system and things like that. So for us to be sitting down and having this call now is kind of a full circle moment for me. And so I'm kind of really delighted that this has happened. So I'll just start by saying thank you.
All right, that's really kind of you. A bit maybe flattering, but look, as I say, it's really kind of you, but there aren't, unfortunately, I think, many politicians at the moment who view their role as holding the government to account. Unfortunately, I think our Dáil doesn't really work very well in that regard anymore. I think it's very important that it does. I mean, there were a lot of, there were at least a number of politicians when I was, I don't know, like a long time ago when I had different colour hair and lots of things, but who view their role as holding the government to account, asking the difficult questions, interrogating government policy. Whereas I just don't see that happening at the moment. It's very kind of you what you said and very flattering and all the rest of it. But I mean, I don't think it would have happened if sort of opposition parties were viewing their role as making the government explain their policies and why they were doing what they were doing, and really delving down and interrogating that. Like around COVID, for example, I mean, I completely accept that what the government did was motivated by protecting as many people as possible, and that's great. But I mean, there was also a huge overreach, in my view, of the state. I mean, you had the state effectively telling people to stay in their homes, to stay within a certain distance of their homes. It was completely unprecedented in my lifetime, and I think ever in the history of the state. And nobody really was questioning, is this useful? Is this necessary? Is this getting us? What is the end that's being pursued by this? Because while all of this was happening, people were being released or discharged rather from acute hospitals into nursing homes and bringing COVID-19 with them, and these were the people that it was sought to protect. So there weren't a lot of questions being answered. I mean, I've noted that I believe, and I don't think you have to agree 100% with somebody to think that their candidature is worthwhile and worth supporting. And I don't agree with 100% on anything, and I think it's a very kind of unfortunate facet of current day politics that you find something that you can disagree with rather than something that you can agree with somebody on. And my view is that we have to accommodate people who are seeking asylum in Ireland, but I don't think that anybody should be making a killing on providing what is a legal requirement of the state or an essential state duty. And that's what's happening in Ireland. I mean, there are a lot of people making a lot of money, and it's something that you have interrogated, and it's something that I think is why I'm quite happy to endorse you and support you, because you've drilled down into that in a way that I haven't seen anybody in the Dáil do.
Yeah, and that's why, or even any investigative journalist, maybe there's one or two, and that's what we're lacking. And one of my criticisms, of that is that the current international obligations that this is all based upon, there's not enough protections from the financialization or manipulation of these requirements. That's the key point here. These international obligations are so outdated, drafted in the 1950s, and before an era of private equity, of low-cost airlines, mobile phones, social media. Combine all those together, and you've got a whole different set of things. So I think my thing is that these international obligations should be updated, and there should be protections so that people cannot profit off of the most vulnerable people or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair that you say that they need to be updated. I mean, the bigger issue is that in Ireland we have decided that we're going to make a cohort of people extraordinarily wealthy. In fairness, now the Sunday Business Post did cover it with quite a good expose on the profit margins being recorded by these companies. But I mean, I'm from Clare. I live in Clare. There's a lot of hospitality businesses going to the wall. I mean, there are now 3 pubs that open in Scariff at all. One of them at weekends. 2 very recently shut down. That's mirrored right across rural Ireland. I mean, from East Clare, West Clare is particularly reliant on hospitality, the tourism industry. And you're seeing hospitality businesses going to the wall because they can't make a margin. And we're seeing 40 to 50% of the money that the state is paying these large companies backed by very wealthy people, getting a 40 to 50% of the exorbitant amounts of money that the state is paying being put away as pure profit. I mean, that's... I think that's without parallel in the tourism industry. I talk to restaurateurs, I talk to hoteliers, I talk to people who have bars, and they can't make a margin. And these people are making 40 to 50%, up to 60% in some cases. So obviously the state is paying a lot more than it needs to. There's also, of course, the issue of the numbers of people who are in direct provision who shouldn't be in direct provision, because direct provision is something that you're in while your asylum claim is being determined. At Christmas 2023, about a third of the people in direct provision were there, even though their cases had been determined, but they had nowhere else to go. There was a sort of a ping pong between the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Integration as to who was responsible for them. Minister of Housing didn't want to know because it was going to make his figures look worse. But yet this was like it was just a selfish, I want my figures to look good. It doesn't matter what it's costing the Exchequer. And it was costing the Exchequer billions, literally. And so, I congratulate you for having looked at that issue in detail and sort of putting up in stark figures what people are being paid for this.
Yeah. And what you're kind of being modest about is you're saying that other parties aren't doing their job and it's making you look better. And
I think that's fair.
No, I don't.
Well, I do.
I do think that they're not doing their job, or journalists aren't doing the job, and there is just a wide opportunity here for people to capitalize on it and just put in the work and do their job for them. But the question is why aren't the parties in opposition taking the intellectual argument here and calling it out? If you look across Europe, a lot of left-wing leaning parties have realized that they can't maintain these levels of people in order to keep their welfare state functioning. Denmark, Sweden, and so on. So why in your opinion is nobody just taken an intellectual argument here?
I think there are a variety of reasons. I mean, I just think that Dáil is not a very attractive place to be for a lot of people right now, for a variety of reasons. I mean, it's very well paid, but at the same time, I mean, I think a lot of my colleagues at the bar earn a lot more than a TD earns. That's part of it. But then there's this. I don't know. I mean, politics and public discourse generally is taking a really funny turn where, if you think immigration is not a bad thing, or immigrants shouldn't be vilified, then you can't question any aspect of it. You can't question anything at all about it, which I fundamentally disagree with. I mean, I think every aspect of government policy and government action should be open to scrutiny. And there's a real reluctance, I think, in the media they don't want to appear anti-immigrant or sort of find themselves outside the tribe almost by questioning any aspect of it. And then I don't fully understand it, because just because you think that people shouldn't be profiteering doesn't mean that you think people shouldn't be accommodated. I mean, there's also an issue around the length of time that people are accommodated for. I mean, our asylum processing times it takes a very long time by international standards, and one would have thought that if you have an increasing number of people coming to Ireland, as you do, then you need to spend at least as much money on processing their claims as you do on accommodating them. But that's not the approach that the government have taken, and nobody really has taken them to task. But I mean, this is just one aspect of the government. I mean, there are huge revenues flowing into Ireland at the moment. I mean, it's certainly very few European countries have a similar problem, which is how do we spend all the money we have? That obviously makes Ireland an attractive place to come to, but it also makes Ireland a place where politics has been reduced to throwing money at a problem rather than finding solutions. And I mean, that money is going to run out probably pretty quickly, unfortunately. So we are going to need people, I think, who are willing to interrogate, well, is money the problem here? I mean, is money the problem with our healthcare system? Is money the problem with UHL? I mean, I'm from the Midwest, where the health outcomes aren't, well, I mean, where there's a general fear of going to hospital. I mean, our health system is creaking everywhere. It's particularly bad in the Midwest, but more and more money is being thrown at it. But is that really achieving the solutions? It seems it's not, and that seems to be the only solution that we have. And I suppose ultimately, it's civil servants. It is an easy option to give more money, but it is for democratically elected representatives, I think, to safeguard the taxes that people are paying, or the borrowings. I mean, you can finance the state in two ways, with taxes or borrowings. At the moment, it's taxes. Previously, it was with borrowings, and we borrowed for as long as we could too, until the international market said, "Sorry, you're a basket case. We're not going to lend you money anymore." And we found that people had to come in from outside to sort of basically demand that we get a grip on our state's finances. And I just feel we're in the same place all over again, only like 15 years later. It's extraordinary to me in many respects.
Yeah, well, there's a few things that have been, like, a lot of the people that went bust during the Celtic Tiger and went into NAMA are back again, and a lot of them are profiting through this asylum stuff. And it actually just angers me as someone who is generation rent, cannot get a mortgage. Ireland has some of the highest mortgage rates in Ireland in the EU because of a direct hangover from the crash. And here these cowboys are back and they're profiting.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think that because people make a mistake that they should be pilloried or penalised forever. But I think the bigger problem is how quickly as a state we've moved into just throwing money at problems without actually demanding. I mean, there were in the case of accommodation provided for IPAS or beneficiaries of simple protection, there were almost no safeguards in place this time last year until questions started to be asked, and then we were told, there's a unit, and how many are in the unit? Oh, some. It was just a little bit incredible that anybody would see fit to spend exchequer funding in that way. And I mean, if that's not unique to immigration, and it would be, I think, wrong to limit it to immigration, but it's how the state is operating at the moment generally.
Yeah, well, it's easiest to talk about immigration because it's one of the most controversial issues, one of the most topical, and it's one of the ones that's not talked about on OT or News Talk. And we'll be putting this up online, and people will be genuinely delighted that we're actually able to just hold the argument in full in both hands and just delve into it. Whereas you listen to them on RT or wherever, and they tiptoe around some of the parts of it. And like my thing is the problem is we have too much money in so many ways that we can just paper over the problems. And it's only when the tide goes out that we actually realize what's gone on, and that might not happen. It might happen sooner because of U.S. Tax changes. We don't know, but it's only a matter of time. Like, what is the plan for Ireland? I keep asking. At the moment, it seems the only plan is praying that Google and Apple don't leave.
Yeah, that does seem to be very much the case, and I mean, it influences. I mean, it has repercussions, obviously, in our tax system, in how we spend money, but maybe also, I mean, we don't enjoy. I mean, since I was elected to the European Parliament, I'm kind of working on GDPR issues, AI, and we certainly don't enjoy a particularly good reputation for how we police these large corporations in terms of data protection, and it's resulted in further pieces of legislation being proposed to try to improve Ireland's coordination. It's a nice euphemism with other states. But, at least, I mean, I never thought I'd find myself saying this, but at least after Bertie Ahern's government, when it all went belly up, we had a lot of housing to show for it, and we had motorways, even some motorways that you might question why they went in one direction rather than another, but at least the motorways were built. I mean, we have very, very little in terms of infrastructure to show for the current boom, and it is that infrastructure that you rely on as the backbone of your economy when times get bad and there isn't money, because you're in that period, like, you're not really in a position to borrow. Now, I know the government will say that that we have that they can't invest in infrastructure because it will overheat the economy, but they show no reluctance not to throw money into the social welfare system, for example. There's no fear of overheating the economy by doing that. So it is a concern to me that even in terms of our grid, I mean, our electricity grid, obviously, electricity and energy shortages and energy costs across Europe is a huge issue for almost every European member state. But I mean, we have a grid that's at capacity. I don't see any great moves afoot to develop capacity in our grid. There's a lot of talk about all this capacity for offshore floating wind, but we need grid capacity to do that. We need demapping so that we can determine which areas are suitable for that. You have international investors queuing up to invest in Ireland and leaving, shaking their heads and spending that money in either Portugal or Scotland.
Yeah, well, energy is so crucial because, like, if we want to keep Google and Apple happy, what they want and need is energy, in order to power their AI data centers. And data centers are a dirty word for some people. But the solution is not to tear them down. The solution is just to provide more energy, like abundant energy. And there's a few ways of doing that. I was pretty annoyed when the LNG plant didn't go ahead in Shannon. I thought that, to provide just energy security in general, like, should be one of the most important things. But is it the fact that, like, we're just being railroaded by campaign groups, whether they're tied to any parties or climate activists, or we all understand that we need to reduce carbon, but at what cost? Is it a direct result? Is our infrastructure incapabilities a direct result of that, or are they connected?
I just think it's an attachment to easy answers. I mean, I would find this ban on extraction and exploration in the Corra Basin or off the west of Ireland even more inexplicable than the LNG thing, because I think there's a general acceptance that a lot of LNG, I mean, it's either brought from the Gulf or it comes from frack gas in North America, which is pretty detrimental to the environment. But there's a huge carbon footprint either way of fracking gas and shipping it to Ireland, or shipping gas from the Gulf. But we have gas off the west coast of Ireland. I mean, many people accept that we need to transition, but, like, how do we keep the lights on while we transition? I mean, if it's importing gas at a higher carbon footprint, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, regarding the data centres, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, data centres have become a completely almost dirty word in Ireland. I mean, I recently met an environmental lobbyist in Brussels who flew over, it has to be said, from Ireland. But were telling me how detrimental data centres were, and I was like, but we both have smartphones that are using data and lots of it, so they're going to have to be located somewhere. And I mean, I'd rather they be in a temperate climate that, where, because a lot of the energy they use is heating them in the winter and cooling them in the summer. It doesn't get very hot in Ireland in the summer. It doesn't get very cold in the winter. So Ireland is a suitable place to locate them in terms of their carbon footprint will be smaller in Ireland than it will be in many parts of the world. Leaving aside completely, of course, that most of the corporations that want to develop these data centres are paying corporation taxes in Ireland and have a large corporate presence here. And one might have thought that, that there is a quid pro quo. Now, people could say, well, they can take their dirty money somewhere else. That's fine. They can and they probably will. But what's going to fund our state? Because, again, we hear the government saying, oh, we're not using money that's unsustainable, but we are. I mean, our whole state is now heavily dependent upon corporation taxes. Well, and other taxes that come from corporations' presence here, such as income taxes. I mean, if the big multinational corporations that you've mentioned were to leave in Ireland, there's no doubt that we would have a huge hole in our state's finances.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, it's actually sad because I meet people and sometimes they say to me, they hope, this was when Trump was getting in, they hope Trump would get in and change the tax rules and tank the Irish economy because that might be the only thing that fixes the direction of travel for Ireland. Yeah, I think that's so sad because we have...
But I mean, also, the whole Trump, obviously, people in West Clare particularly have a particular view of Trump that he, a positive view, which is shared across the state.
Isn't there?
Yeah. Yes, so have I. I mean, it's done big. But, beyond that, I just find some of the narratives around Trump's election, this story that was recently in BBC that counselling was offered for staff afterwards, I just find it inexplicable. And this whole idea that it was males without university educations that were the problem. I mean, there was a time that they elected, they were called workers, by the way, they elected generations of Democrats in the States, and they elected left-leaning politicians in Ireland too. Yeah. Back when one of the bigger parties was a more left-wing party, I'm talking about Fianna Fáil, was a more left-wing party, or when the British Labour Party wasn't so involved with major companies that, control the military-industrial complex in the States. But that's the way we've gone. I mean, the left has become about big business and protecting the military-industrial complex, and the right has almost become more questioning of military spending. There's a strange sort of. What Trump will ultimately do, I have no idea. I mean, I'm not saying that he's going to be a force for good, but I don't. I don't believe that he was going to be a force for evil any more than the alternative in the States, and he does provide employment in Clare, which is more than the government have done for a very long time.
And just like focusing on
the Irish government, that is.
Yeah, just focusing on the Irish general election. Like, I think I'm right in saying that you were a member of Labour. And what do you think of the current setup, not just of Labour, but of this relation? Even the relationship between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, this concept of the rotating Tshuk, we can't be normalising this, but what is the alternative answer? Like, if this left bloc of Labour, Social Democrats, gets together, do you see that could happen, or has Labour changed since your day?
Well, I think Labour has changed, but every party changed. I've changed too. I mean, they would, I'm sure, like to point that out and disavow me or whatever, and that's fine. But, I think this whole rotating Tshuk idea, it's kind of emblematic of where the Dáil is at, that everybody's just marking time and sort of feeling, well, won't question too much, won't interrogate too much, and it'll be my turn to be in government or in cabinet soon. And maybe that's perhaps one of the problems that befell the largest opposition party in the last Dáil. I mean, in my view, but that's a matter for them. I mean, I don't really wish to talk about particular parties and the eve of election. I mean, there are candidates from all of those parties in the field at the moment, and I think it'd be unfair in a way. There are good candidates from a variety of parties, but it's this. I think it's a bit of a problem that we can't acknowledge that sometimes that there are even good candidates from parties that we disagree. I mean, this complete polarization of politics is a bit of a problem, and it's like Punch and Judy almost. It's
that's something I actually talk about. Is I kind of wish there was more crossover between parties. Like if I come background is law firms, and there's always like people moving across the different law firms one to the other, and same in any industry. But you bring knowledge from that place to the other one. And the fact that what's happened with political parties is they're just rooted or tethered to such, their base ideologies, that the concept of even one person moving to something that's very closely aligned is just alien. Whereas people used to move around parties. And I think that it creates just a better, more collegiate environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think they identify around almost like in a tribal way now rather than as an ideology. And I mean, your ideology can change for a variety of reasons. I mean, I suppose I would have had less concerns about state overreach before COVID, and suddenly it was there in front of me. I just personally couldn't believe what I was seeing. But that was, maybe I realised that Micheál Martin at one point, and this isn't meant to be as a criticism of. Well, I mean, he referred to me in the Dáil as a libertarian, as if it was a put down, or that I was going to be hurt by it. And I was like, but kind of, I grew up being told in school that Daniel O'Connell was a civil libertarian, and it was a noble thing almost, So and of course, I mean, that there are times when society, individuals have to give way to society. But I mean, that balance, that there was no balance, there was no interrogation of whether we were achieving a balance. It was just like this idea that by infringing on basic human liberties that we were going to defeat an airborne virus was nuts.
Yeah.
And by the way, cost an awful lot of money and resulted in massive inflation, which, I mean, everybody likes to point to Vladimir Putin as the root cause of our inflation, but, there was huge inflation in the United States as well, and that had no cause. Sort of the war in Ukraine had no impact on the United States inflation. It was purely
COVID.
Started by COVID spending, and ultimately that was what brought Trump back to power, or one of the main factors, it seems, in bringing him back to power.
On last week's debate with Katie Hannon, they spent 20 or 30 minutes talking about the cost of living crisis, right? And I'm kind of looking at the TV and go, nobody's actually talking about, the fact that it's the euro that's losing value. It's inflation. Yeah. Everything else is going up. We don't have a very good base of financial literacy in Ireland, because we never talk about the price of gold. Like, the price of gold has doubled this year, or over the last I don't know. And we should be kind of telling people, yeah, maybe holding your, like just saving yours is not a good idea. But the state to admit that, obviously is a big step. But we just don't have that culture. Whereas in America, they have a completely different culture around all that. But the solution for the government, the action I want to see from the government is to encourage people to invest, like create a 401k or ISA type structure to allow people to invest easily, easier.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there have been efforts around that, but I mean, the broader issues that you raise are true, unfortunately. I mean, Europe is being decimated by this war for a variety of reasons. There is no energy in Europe, metaphorically and literally. Germany is the industrial sort of power base of Europe, has made a number of pretty disastrous political and economic decisions around energy.
They shut down their nuclear.
Shutting down a nuclear power plant and then becoming completely dependent on Russia, and then thinking that it can poke Russia in the eye and there won't be repercussions. I'm not for a moment suggesting that the Russian invasion of Ukraine isn't illegal and immoral, but most wars are illegal and immoral. I just not fully understanding of that there isn't a greater attempt by Europeans to bring it to an end.
Yeah.
And it's almost like if you suggest that it should come to an end, I mean, Sabina Higgins did. Again, she might not share your politics, you might not share hers, but you get pilloried for suggesting it comes to an end, notwithstanding the fact that, this war is crippling Europe. And we'll have will bring about unforeseen political change. I have no doubt about that.
You completely. And just touching on the nuclear stuff, like it's so funny. There's a brilliant YouTube video comparing France and Germany from an energy point of view and around the basis of nuclear. And there is a solution to climate change, and it's called nuclear energy. And it's like if you look at France's climate targets, they're doing the best out of everyone because they've gone down that road. Sweden have announced they're going to do it, but we can't. It's baked into our, I think, 1999 Electricity Act that we can't do it. So part of my things like, well, maybe should we be having this discussion? It would solve a lot of problems. It would solve your carbon stuff. It would solve your Google abundant energy problem. But again, it's a very difficult task to bring that conversation into play.
I mean, I haven't heard it really raised in the Dáil anyway. But I mean, I think we also have to be realistic. I mean, nuclear energy is very expensive. It is very reliable, but it is very expensive. I mean, there are maybe renewables that we could be harvesting or are looking to harvest off the west coast around floating wind and around wave energy. There's some interesting developments. But I mean, undoubtedly, you have to figure out how to keep the lights on when the wind isn't blowing as well. And we do use, like, nobody wants to talk about it in Ireland, but we do use quite a lot of nuclear energy in Ireland because we import a lot of energy, and a lot of, ultimately, the source of that energy is nuclear that we're importing. So we're quite, while there are lots of there's a lot of pearl clutching going on nuclear energy, we're happy to import it.
Well, and the proposal, I think, is to have more interconnectors with France. Yeah. And that's a good idea. Like, that's definitely a good idea. I even saw an interconnector to the US, which I think would be one of the biggest interconnectors. I don't know if that's feasible. But when it comes to nuclear, I have great debates with people saying it's not feasible in Ireland. It is, and both are very intelligent people, come from a good background on it. So it's just one of these things that I'd like to see debated. I don't care where the answer is, but let's just talk. And same that applies to immigration, to everything else, like to prison systems, the criminal justice system. Let's have the open conversation, not be taboo. But so just wrapping up, a question I get on the doors all the time is, what are you going to do? You're just an independent. Now, Dublin Bay South has never voted in an independent, so I've my work cut out for me. But if I do get in, please God, what advice do you have for me as an independent in the Dáil?
Just don't be afraid to ask the difficult questions, because ultimately we need, in my view, we need parliamentarians who are prepared to ask the questions, who are prepared to make ministers explain why they're pursuing policies beyond, well, somebody told me it was a good idea. Well, who told you? What best interest do they have? And if the civil service isn't always right. It's not, and I don't wish to be negative about the civil service either, because I think civil service would prefer if there was a stronger government taking the lead and moving the country in a direction for which it has a democratic mandate to move the country. But to interrogate the government, I mean, I think that was maybe, there isn't as much of that as there used to be. I mean, and I think ministers are almost surprised when they're made to explain government policy, whether that's the Minister for Justice or the Minister for Energy. In fairness to Eamon Ryan, I mean, I know he's frequently pilloried, but he was always willing to engage in a constructive debate. He was always willing to come into the Dáil, and he was always willing to explain what he was doing. You might not agree with him, you might not agree with what he was doing, but he was always willing to explain it a lot more than many of his counterparts in Cabinet. And that's one thing I would have to say about Eamon Ryan. But I mean, in many other areas. Now, I personally didn't buy his explanation for why we're not moving a lot faster on floating offshore energy. But he was at least, this idea that we're not going to have a Wild West, that it's going to be centrally planned and all of that. But that was, of course, a complete departure from what had previously been announced. And as you know, I'm sure from your work in the private sector, there's nothing investors hate more than a sudden change of direction. I mean, They like predictability. That's the basis upon which people invest. But to get back to the question, it's to ask the questions and not be afraid to ask the questions. And you probably find that you're, if you are elected, and I hope you will be, that you're one of relatively few asking a lot of questions.
Yeah, thanks. And just if a lot of independents do get through, would you like to see? Do you think it's possible that, or do you see the need for a new grouping, alliance, party, whatever you want to call it? What do you think is the solution for all these independents?
Well, I think the future is around agreeing fundamental policies in which that they would agree to implement as part of a programme for government, be it on taxation, be it on energy policy, be it on the environment, be it on immigration, be it on how we accommodate immigrants, how we accommodate everybody else in the society, to agree principles and not sort of agree around being, we're all in a gang together, sort of some kind of a tribal structure, but rather an ideological structure. This is what we agree on, this is what we want to implement, this is what we will implement as part of a programme for government. I think that's possible. Would Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, who are likely to get a large number of seats, whether they would agree with that, it would make them very uncomfortable, because it might show up their own lack of ideology. I mean, I know that somebody has recently talked about an ideological husk that's been carved out. I think it's a fair enough comment. I think we need a little bit more ideology and ideas in politics at the moment in Ireland.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I really appreciate you taking the time. I do think, I hope you're enjoying life over as an MEP. Your voice will be missed in the next Dáil.
But all very kind of you.
I hope it'll be back in the Dáil again in the future, though.
Yeah, and I hope I'll be hearing your voice in the Dáil, because it is important. I'm very serious, because it is crucial to have people who are prepared to ask the questions. Be they, I've much more regard for people that I might have an ideological disagreement who are prepared to ask the difficult questions rather than just throw labels. I mean, I really find this Dáil coverage where you have people, even former colleagues of mine, just labelling people because they don't agree with them and name calling and stuff. It's embarrassing. Just ask the questions, do your job, get on with it, and interrogate what direction we're moving in and why and what it is that we hope to achieve.
Yeah, and then one of the things they say is when you do ask a question or do something, it's immediately, oh, you're dog whistling to the left, you're dog whistling to the right. No, I'm not dog whistling to anyone. I'm just asking a question or making a point. And that's more labeling. Like, yeah, I completely agree.
No, I mean, there's this politics of condemnation and wanting to label people because it's easy, it's convenient, it's lazy ultimately. It doesn't serve anybody's... it doesn't bring the country forward in any way, shape or form. It just makes the Dáil a less appealing place to the majority of people. It makes a lot of people even less likely to vote, which is not... I think if politicians are making people less likely to vote, they're not doing their job.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Well, someone who's not lazy is you, Michael. Thanks for this on Friday night. But thank you very much. We'll wrap there, and I think
the very best of luck in the coming week. And I really hope the people of Dublin Bay South will come out and vote for somebody, because while there isn't a history of independence in Dublin Bay South, there is a history of people who are prepared to ask questions and put it up to the government to make them explain. That is a history and a tradition that is in Dublin Bay South, and one I hope that will be continued and result in a vote for you that enables you to be part of the next Dáil.
I hope so
Best of
too.
luck.
Thanks very much.